land of Lothric attracts many foreigners, each on a path of their own. While some paths are guided by righteousness, others are driven by madness alone. In the case of the Mound Makers, they are fueled both by madness and by greed, and those unfortunate enough to be felled by their blade become grotesque trophies, a family for their killer. While other covenants either act in service of a god, a deity, or a cause, the Mound Makers act in service of themselves. For this reason, one would believe that they are to be scorned and looked upon with disdain. However, this is Dark Souls, and things are not always as they appear on the surface. Perhaps they deserve pity instead. Description of the Mound Makers read: a malformed vertebrae found by the mad, with a queer symbol on its inside, proof of the shackles of the gods. The Mound Makers wish only to add to their mounds, becoming mad spirits, whether summoned as cooperators or invaders. They are blithe to those around them, for in their minds any kill might lead to another shackle. When analysing this covenant, the description gives us a basic understanding of this faith, for lack of a better word, and its followers. The trophy taken by the Mound Makers is a malformed vertebrae, one of the bones that makes up the spine. Inside the bone is a symbol of some kind, proof of the shackles of the gods. This is actually where we run into our first roadblock. What is the symbol of? I've looked at it myself and tried to find other appearances of it in Dark Souls as well as in the real world, but haven't found it anywhere else, so by all means, if you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. The only idea I did have is that it somewhat resembles an ink blot test, an examination that requires the observer to speak of what they see, without the image resembling anything explicitly. This is a bit similar to how the nature of the Dark Souls story has been presented to us, somewhat formless depending on our perception of things to explain what we observe. Secondly, the symbol is seen to be proof of the shackles of the gods. This could mean one of two things. Firstly, it could mean that the gods themselves are shackled, or that the people in which the symbols are found are slaves to the gods. I believe it is the second meaning, and that the Mound Makers' covenant is a revolt of sorts against the gods. The vertebrae are dropped by Carthus swordsmen relatively more frequently than other enemies, still not by much. It is unknown whether this is because they are pretty much skeletons, making the vertebrae easier to find, or for another reason entirely. The Mound Makers wish to add to their mounds or stack of bones, and are loyal to no one but themselves. As they accrue more shackles, they are rewarded for their work, first with a strange blade, second with a pyromancy. It is also important to note that the vertebrae are found exclusively by the mad or insane. We'll also talk later on how this could be a synonym for something else. The first reward received for submitting 10 vertebrae shackles is the Bloodlust Katana. The katana, while not especially powerful, has an interesting design and a very unique weapon art which is not shared with any other katana. The description of Bloodlust reads: the Mound Maker piled sacrifices upon the altar, but became the final offering himself, leaving this katana as a gift for his dear family. Stain blade with one's own blood to temporarily grant uncanny sharpness. For one driven by bloodlust, nothing deserves to remain standing. Firstly, this confirms that there have been at least one other member of the Mound Makers' covenant who was devout enough to pile many sacrifices on the altar before sacrificing himself using his own blade. I have tried to figure out who the blade belonged to, but have been unable to settle on a satisfactory answer. I do not think that the previous owner was Hodrick, as firstly he is not dead, and secondly his weapon of choice seems to be a flamberge. Let me know what you think in the comments. It's interesting that the description mentions him leaving the katana as a gift for his family. By Mound Maker's logic, the family is made up of those that the Mound Maker has slain. Therefore, it is strange that the katana is imparted to you for beginning your own mound. It is difficult to know how closely the weapon art of Bloodlust is related to the real-world concept of seppuku. The method of suicide known as seppuku or harakiri was used primarily when a samurai warrior had shown cowardice in battle or if dishonor had been displayed. I understand that there are obviously many branching concepts to seppuku, and I am by no means an expert, so take all of this with a grain of salt. The weapon art, unlike Seppuku, does not seem to kill the player, but rather it buffs the weapon and improves the attack rating. This seems to be quite antithetical to the original point of Seppuku, which was to preserve the warrior's honor and release their spirit into the afterlife. Personally, I believe it would have been more fitting for the weapon art to have a Ring of Sacrifice-like effect, allowing the player to die without losing their souls and respawn at the nearest bonfire. Nevertheless, it seems to be at least loosely tied to the theme of sacrifice that the Mound Makers base themselves on. At 30 vertebrae shackles submitted, you will receive the Warmth Pyromancy. Its description reads, "They feared separation from the gods, and sought a familial bond, perhaps leading to the creation of this flame of harmony." What this seems to impart to us is while the Mound Makers feel separation from the gods is necessary, it is also a difficult and uncertain path to travel. The Way of White and the Darkmoon Blades are known to strike down those who offend the gods, so it is a choice not taken lightly. Mound Makers are known to attack friend and foe alike, and if we attack friendly NPCs, we become sinners and require absolution to become clean in the eyes of the gods. It seems that the Mound Makers wish to replace their connection to the gods for a familial bond. As we know, there are several references to family in this covenant, and the bond is referred to as the mound of corpses left behind, a family to have after death. Perhaps Hodrick and others doubted the loyalty of the gods to them after death, and required something that they had created themselves in order to feel whole. The fact that the flame seems to be an attempt for harmony may imply that there is disharmony within one's relationship to the gods, and that the gods may simply see humans as slaves. By observing how organized religion is portrayed in the Souls games, I think it's quite safe to assume that Miyazaki, the creator of the series, is quite skeptical of the sincerity of organized religion. Between the Way of White, the Aldrich Faithful, and many others, religion is shown to be a corrupted, rotten institution that subjugates its members. Perhaps somewhat more interesting, the description of the Warmth Pyromancy in Dark Souls 2 is, as it gives us a bit more of a different understanding of what the Covenant are all about. Fire can be a show of strength, but it is also a symbol of wisdom and comfort. Fire is what the caster wishes it to be. We know that pyromancies can be cast both internally and externally, and the inherent nature of a flame can take the form of what the caster wishes it to be. While not being direct evidence for the following theory, it did make me think about the nature of Dark Souls and how the story can essentially become what you want it to be if there is a vacuum of truth. In this respect, it's interesting that the symbol on the inside of the vertebrae is somehow proof of the shackles of the gods, seen by the mad. While we cannot see how this could be, at least I can't, the Mound Makers do. They see what they want to see. The description of the vertebrae shackle reads, "A special bone collected by members of the Covenant of Mound Makers discovered in the corpses of their victims. Only one such bone is found in the vertebrae, and the Mound Makers believe it to be a shackle of the gods. In their minds, each victim is another connection, an addition to the family. It is curious that the bone supposedly shackled to the gods is found in the spine. The spine is responsible for the allowing of the body to essentially have control of all of its movement and physical strength. Without the spine, the body is nothing. Therefore, the shackle is actually control over the body and its faculties, essentially making a person a slave to the gods. This aids the theory that the Mound Makers are revolting against the mostly polytheistic world of Dark Souls. In addition to this, it would make them an enemy to covenants such as the Way of White and Darkmoon Blades, who punish those who offend the gods. The most important element to take from this is the dimension of the family. The Mound Makers do not kill simply for the sake of killing, at least in their minds. From their perspective, they kill to create a familial bond. This could be a factor of paramount importance later on, and will help us understand more about the effects of hollowing the Undead curse and those it has afflicted. The Undead curse did not discriminate against any class, afflicting those both rich and poor, even the pious. The one we find in the Pit of Hollows is Holy Knight Hodrick, a proud warrior and pyromancer. He is the character who allows you to join the Mound Makers Covenant. The description of his armor set reads, "The sorry fool was known to wander the battlefield as a crazed ghoul, lashing out at friend and foe alike." This shows to us that while Hodrick may have once been a knight of some reverence, the status has since become lost, and he is pitied in his madness. It is my belief that Hodrick may originate from the eastern land of Mirror, which adds several layers to his character. Proof of this theory is found in the shield he carries. In Dark Souls 3 it is called the Sunset Shield, with the description reading, "Shield of the Holy Knight of the Sunless Realms, engraved with a brilliant flame crest that burns brightly within the Order's customary sunset colours. This design symbolises those who both harbour and oppose the power of flame." Let us now look at the Mirror Shield from Dark Souls 2. The description reads, "Shield issued to the proud knights of Mirror's official order." In Mirror, a land perennially beset by unrest, this shield was a symbol of the great knight's strength and willingness to give their lives for their country. As we can see, the shields are visually identical, and comparing the descriptions offer us insight into Hodrick. It says that the shield was issued to the Holy Knights of the Sunless Realms. If the shields are from the same place, the Holy Knights could be considered Mirror's official order of knights. The unrest that the Mirror shield refers to is not specific, but it is originating from the Sunless Realms may suggest that Mirror may have suffered a fate similar to Anor Londo, falling under the Endless Night, bereft of sun, along with the Undead Curse, which can, as we know, rot empires from the inside. If Hodrick is from Mirror, and then his country of origin is the same as Lucatiel and Azlatiel's, both knights who fell victim to the Undead Curse. Pair this with the fact that Lucatiel's set and sword can both be acquired in the Undead Settlement, where Hodrick is found, we start to see a connection between Mirror and the Mound Makers. Azlatiel's motives for attacking you in Dark Souls 2 are not specified, seeming only to kill for sport. However, we do know from the Mound Makers that even violence that appears to be pointless may hold a deeper meaning. I'm not saying that Azlatiel was a Mound Maker himself, but there are similarities between his character and Hodrick's. Another reason why the Mirror connection is interesting is that Hodrick and Lucatiel both suffer from the Undead Curse, and their appearance in Dark Souls focuses on how the process of hollowing has affected them. Furthermore, trading a vertebrae shackle to Pumperum yields Lucatiel's mask, further implying that the wearer had something to do with the Mound Makers. In Dark Souls 2, Lucatiel lets the player know how she feels as the Undead Curse takes control of her, feeling her memories and feelings slipping away, melting, unable to discern those friendly and those who are foe. Hodrick suffers from the Undead Curse as well, but has not lost his faculties to the point where he cannot control himself around you, although he can invade you in a mad attempt to add you to his mound. It is Hodrick's dialogue that allows us to begin pulling apart his motives and driving forces behind his actions. Firstly, upon meeting him, Hodrick says,
"Well, what's up? This pit is for hollows, not for the likes of you sane folk. Or perhaps you are a hollow, posing as otherwise?"
Firstly, this indicates that the beings brought into the pit for sacrifice are supposed to be hollowed, and not sane folk, also known as those not affected, or yet to be affected by the hollowing process. What it also implies is that Hodrick himself is hollowed, yet retains a semblance of control over his mind. If you tell him you are hollow, he says,
Yes, then we're just fine. It's important to know who you are. But we'll all be mad soon enough. And should you be undead, well, all the more so.
Hodrick attempts to make a distinction between being hollow and being undead. Being undead is the beginning, and hollowing is the eventual state that one will reach after many deaths, losing control of their sanity and becoming, as Hodrick puts it, mad. He also says how it's important to know oneself. This is something that worried Lucatiel in Dark Souls 2, who fretted over losing the sense of self. Hodrick differs from this by understanding the inevitability of the hollowing process, and that by going mad is unavoidable.
Beware, the shackles of the gods are fragile. You might need this. Etch it on your heart if you feel your sanity slipping. Come here to pile up your victims, for that will form your anchor. You'll see when you go mad. They'll be your family.
Frustratingly, this dialogue, which seems to reveal the most, also seems to be the most ambiguous. When Hodrick says that the shackles are fragile, does he mean it literally, as in the vertebrae are fragile, or that the rain that the gods have on human beings are fragile, and are prone to breakage? He seems to be implying that your anchor is slipping. so too will your sanity, and true hollowing will eventually overtake you. The anchor seems to be in reference to sanity in some veiled way, that killing will prolong the hollowing process. In the context of Dark Souls 1, this could be seen quite literally, as killing enemies rewarded you with humanity, which allowed you to reverse the hollowing process until you die again. The reference to familial ties pops up here and becomes important for understanding Hodrick. An experienced mound maker, Hodrick seems to forget that he already has a family, or at least remains of one, such as Sirris of the Sunless Realms. We will discuss the possibility of other family members later. What is interesting is that, like Lucatiel, who laments the ties she had to her long-lost brother, Hodrick appears to be forging the bond or anchor of a family himself. As a bit of a side note, the concept of those you kill becoming a family of sorts in the afterlife reminded me of the real-life Zodiac killer's rationale for killing people, saying that his victims would become his slaves after he was reborn in paradise. Obviously, this doesn't really have any literal connection to Dark Souls, but I thought it was an interesting kind of mind connection nonetheless. If you attack Hodrick, he calls you hollow. What I believe from this is that he assumes this because of the nature of many hollow characters in Dark Souls, especially Azlatiel, who attacks you without provocation, and Laurentius. As he goes hollow in Blighttown, he attacks you with pyromancies when you discover him. Let me kick this off by saying that the Shrine Handmaiden is not Hodrick's wife and or Sirris's grandmother. I know that there seems to be a prevailing narrative about this, but I do not believe it to be true, and I have evidence to disprove it. The source of information that everyone seems to ignore is the friendly cage spider that can be found in the Undead settlement. This is the dialogue in question.
Another Nana disappeared. The grunting carries a cage. He ever has his cage. And Nana's never coming back. So come into the cage and become Nana's shade.
In many languages, Nana is colloquial for grandmother. It is easy to jump to the conclusion that since the Shrine Handmaiden is elderly and, dare I say, grandmotherly, she must be Sirris's grandmother. I do not believe that she is Hodrick's wife. Instead, I believe that Hodrick's wife, Sirris's grandmother, is dead, killed by Hodrick. So what evidence and theories do we have for this? We know Hodrick is losing his memory as the hollowing process increases, becoming less and less in touch with his humanity. What would you do if you knew that eventually all memory of your loved ones would fade, and you would just become a wandering husk, unable to remember anything? Is it so outside the realm of possibility that Hodrick, a man that believes that anyone he slays will become his family once he goes mad, would kill his own to make sure he does remember them once he goes hollow? He doesn't want to forget. Instead of running from his own inevitable fate, he accepts it, and creates his own mad rationale for killing his own. What can we establish from the dialogue to further this theory? Firstly, the cage spider says, another Nana has disappeared. This would imply that there have been multiple grandmothers brought before Hodrick. For those who have seen the film Memento, you know that cycles of murder can repeat without the murderer knowing, especially those with bad or damaged memories. Some have escaped, so the grandson carries a cage. I believe this conveys a possibility that the undead servant, who takes you to the Pit of Hollows, is the grandson of Hodrick and his wife, deformed and mindless, a product of hollowing. The grandson serves the grandfather, bringing victims from the undead settlement via a cage to keep them from running away. It's important to note as well that there have been many of these cages within the Pit of Hollows, further solidifying that many people have been brought before Hodrick. The reason why I think that the Shrine Handmaiden is not related to Hodrick or Sirris is because of the circumstances surrounding the budding green blossom that can be bought from the Handmaiden. This is from the description of the blossom. The brief attached message suggests that it was a gift. Goodbye, dear grandmother. I will visit grandfather in the Pit of Hollows. Essentially, it appears to be a message addressed to the grandmother. Logic would make you believe that because the handmaiden has this in her inventory as it is old, she must be the grandmother referenced. But consider this. Why would a grandmother sell a note given to her by her kin? It seems deeply impersonal and unlikely that a caring elderly family member would sell this, especially because it's basically your husband's death sentence and only for 10 souls, a tiny amount. Compound this with the fact that the note is literally attached to a budding green blossom, which resembles a crude bouquet of sorts. With this in mind, think about where the Firelick Shrine is situated, adjacent to a graveyard. As we know, bouquets are sometimes used to commemorate those who have died, and leaving a bouquet at their grave is customary. I think it is entirely possible, perhaps even certain, that the green budding blossom was left by Sirris on her grandmother's grave, but was taken by the shrine handmaiden to sell, the note meaning nothing to her at all, and it only seems to take away from the value of the product. Also, a thought that I had just now is that, of course, the shrine handmaiden accepts umbral ashes, literally the ashes of dead people. Kind of makes her like a grave robber, which, makes me think that the blossom was also taken from the grave of Sirris's real grandmother. This is why I believe that the real grandmother is dead, and would give Sirris ample reason to lay her grandfather to rest, so he can be with his wife in the afterlife and stop his cycle of destruction. I don't want to talk about Sirris a whole lot, as I believe she has enough lore behind her to have her own video at some point. Having said that, I do want to talk a bit more about her motivations and how she closes Hodrick's cycle of killing and destruction. It's interesting that FromSoft decided to skip a generation in regard to Sirris's family, not mentioning her parents at all. In this regard, we can deduce that Sirris and Hodrick seem to have shared a unique relationship at some point. Sirris can be quite frank when describing characters, as seen when she describes Kraton the Wanderer as a vile bastard. I find this interesting that she does not describe her grandfather in a similar or worse way, seeing on how he has become as his sanity wanes. On the contrary, she seems to be delivering on a promise once made, similar to Sigvard's vow to slay Yorm if he ever lost his mind. The dialogue that seems to be the most telling is,
"I finally found you. Just as I promised, Grandad. Remember?"
Sirris says this as she faces Hodrick in the Pit of Hollows. There are no battle cries, no insults, but compassion, only asking him to remember. It implies that Sirris was searching for Hodrick for a long time, and that she made a promise to do so. If you kill Sirris prior to her completing her mission, she laments for Hodrick, saying,
"Forgive me, Grandad."
Alternatively, upon killing Hodrick, his memory becomes clear for a moment. Free from the grips of hollowing, he utters,
My family. Dear little Sirris.
The Mound Makers, Hodrick, and Sirris are, in my opinion, tragic, yet moving tales of Dark Souls lore. Thank you for watching this video. It's really good to be home after a long vacation, and I am very keen to get back to making some good Dark Souls content. We still have many fertile areas to cover and explore, so be sure to suggest any ideas or suggestions of your own in the comments. Also make sure to follow me on Twitter to stay up to date with the channel, or to just stop by for a chat. Until next time.